Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. So we played D&D last week, and for those of you who have been following my campaign, we're going to talk about what happened and pick up the story. But those of you who don't follow my campaign, I think this is going to be an interesting video, if only for the first subject, which is introducing new characters. Because the first thing that happened in the campaign since the last time we met was my friend Phil, after having gotten his character executed, kind of in a narrative moment, he made a new character. He made a warlock named Graves, and he wrote a really cool backstory for it. I may include it. I'll ask him for permission, but if I eventually get permission from him, I'll include it in the doobly-doo down below. And he really made an effort and did a really great job to tie his character in with all the stuff going on in the world, so it's relevant to him. So that makes him different than a lot of characters that are playing in the Thursday night group, is that they're kind of a band of mercenaries and they're doing the right thing sort of out of inertia, but they haven't really experienced a moment of crisis that forces them to make a decision about if they're going to be good or evil. Stay tuned. In other words, they're doing the right thing because it's the adventure in front of them and it's the most reasonable thing to do. But there is a sense, at least on my part, that some of these characters are more morally ambiguous and they're just going along with it for why not. So Phil creates this new character. He's a warlock named Graves, and one of the cool things about warlocks, at least his warlock, is that he can communicate telepathically, which is something I'm not sure I was aware of. I haven't really played D&D 5 that much. I've only run it. And that's an important point because my players often ask me questions about how their character works, about how their abilities work, and I have to shrug and say, I don't know, it's your character. You're the expert on Ranger or Paladin, or in Phil's case, Warlock. And I think there is a tendency on the player's part to look to the DM and tell them, how does this work? Help me out. But the DM has enough stuff to do. I do kind of know how it works, or I could guess how it works based on the other things I know, but I want to break the habit of the players asking me how their stuff works. It's one thing to ask how a magic item works, for instance, because I'm the DM and I know how that works, or to ask how a monster's ability works because I'm the DM and I have the stats for that. But if it's a spell or a class ability or a race ability, that's your job. That's the player's job. Get the players in the habit of looking that stuff up. So Phil's character Graves has telepathy, and I'm like, that's super cool. How does it work? And he explains it to me. Only the player with telepathy can initiate contact. If you don't have telepathy, you can't make any phone calls. You can only answer the phone when it rings. And the interesting thing about this is that it does not require the two characters to share a language. Which means if you've been paying attention, Phil could communicate with the dryad that the players met in the earlier adventure that may have had some interesting information for them, but wasn't able to deliver it because the players didn't speak Sylvan. So the players have learned that the bad guys are holed up inside Broken Spire Keep. And they suspect that some of the people they're looking for, some of the wizards and spellcasters that have been taken hostage, are inside Broken Spire Keep. And they also have reason to believe that even if they're not in there, if they've been taken below, that the bad guys inside Broken Spire Keep have the other key they need to go into the Underdark. So they have a couple of reasons to investigate this keep, and the party is on their way there, and Phil has come up with good reasons for his character to be going after the bad guys in Broken Spire Keep. Graves was a member of an adventuring party. They were ambushed by these orcs. The orcs took everybody captive, but Graves was knocked unconscious and left behind, thought for dead, and when he wakes up, he's in the middle of a swamp, he doesn't know where anybody is, and he's been tracking the orcs back to their keep. And I got together with Phil before the game, and I role-played for about an hour, his character making it through the forest, arriving at the keep. What do? He wanted to investigate. There was a sense of, I want to get some information, I want to learn some stuff, but I don't want to get in over my head because I am alone. So Broken Spire Keep is surrounded by a 100-foot clearing in every direction, and one of the things that Phil didn't know was that if you cross that clearing, there's about a 50% chance that you're going to hit a pit trap. Now, obviously, if you're searching, you'll find it. This is one of the reasons back in the Player's Handbook in the 80s, they had a 10-foot pole. It wasn't because they expected you to do any pole vaulting, it's because you were expected to use it to tap the ground in front of you or tap the ceiling to see if there were any pit traps or any, traps that were going to spring on you and try to cut off your head. But these players are from a more modern tradition where they don't use 10-foot poles for stuff like that. Phil just goes invisible and thinks that's enough to get him safely across the clearing. The orcs won't be able to see him. True. But pit traps don't care if you're invisible or not. So I said there was a 50% chance, actually the adventure says there's a 50% chance you're going to encounter one of these things on the way across the clearing, and I rolled and there was a pit trap and he fell into it. And he took some damage from falling, and I think maybe there were some spikes down there, I don't remember, but he was able to climb his way out no problem. I didn't really want that to turn into anything, I just wanted to show him there are pit traps around here, you have figured that out, and now Phil has that information, and when he meets up with the heroes and they're talking about assaulting the keep, he can convey to them, hey, there are pit traps around here, watch out. So he falls into a pit trap, he gets out, he tries to climb the walls of the keep, he discovers that the walls are climbable, but he's a bad climber. So he retreats and he goes back into the forest and he waits. He wants to watch and see, are there patrols? There are. What is the nature of the patrols? They have hellhounds. Orcs and hellhounds, bad news. Now, the adventure I bought has no hellhounds in it, but also the adventure I bought has no orcs in it. It's a bandit lair, but the players have already fought humans and bandits, and I wanted to mix it up, so I made it orcs. And because the players have also already fought a couple of orcs, I wanted to mix that up a little bit, so I gave them some hellhounds. I mean, I could have given them war dogs or dire wolves, but hellhounds are cool. And even though hellhounds are nasty, I have the power behind the screen to kind of adjust them to make them level appropriate. So Graves is sitting there hiding in the forest, and then he notices this party of adventurers show up. And he watches them for a little while, and then he decides to make contact. And here we arrive at the lesson of my last D&D session. Phil is an artist and he's an adult, and so he thought this was an interesting opportunity to create some drama. He just pictured a cool scene in his head where this warlock with telepathy makes mental contact with the heroes and they wonder what the hell's going on. What is that voice I hear in my head? Is it the bad guys? And then he arrives and they're like, wow, it's a warlock. Who is this guy? What does he want? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Now that scene that Phil imagined and which I think is cool only makes sense if it's a story. If this were real, there are lots of reasons why these characters would try to kill that guy as soon as they saw him. They would suspect he was a bad guy. They were waiting for a patrol to show up anyway. In addition to telepathy, which is cool, he also has an owl familiar named Mojo. And so he thought it would be cool if this owl sort of lights upon a branch and all of a sudden the players hear this voice in their head and they start wondering what's going on. All this is just an opportunity for a dramatic introduction to this cool character. But the players, I think, were somewhat immature. They quickly got impatient with the drama. I think maybe they thought it awkward. Phil was speaking in character, and most of these players are new to D&D and they're not really comfortable speaking in character. So for instance, when the players see this owl on the branch, they start talking about shooting it and killing it. And I'm sure that they could come up with good reasons why their characters wouldn't trust the owl and they would think it was an evil wizard familiar. And when they hear the voice in their head, they would be suspicious. There are good reasons to do that, but they don't further drama. And they are sitting at the same table with Phil playing Graves. They know it's him trying to introduce his character. And what I should have done was I should have stopped and said, guys, this is Phil trying to introduce his new character. It's just a dramatic moment. Play along. Let him have this dramatic moment. He's about to join the team. Let it be cool. I think often as dungeon masters, we don't say things because we don't want to interrupt the flow and we don't want to tell the players what to do. But if we do say the right thing in the right way, the players will be like, oh, okay, that's cool. And this is one of those instances, I know these guys, I'm 100% certain if I had just said, guys, let Phil introduce, let's come up with a cool way. Let's make this a cool scene. Let's make this a memorable introduction for Graves. The players would have played along. But I didn't say that. And so afterwards, Phil was kind of frustrated. He told me, he said, I really thought I had a cool introduction there and it didn't happen. I don't think he blamed me, but I blame me. Right, I'm the dungeon master. I have more power at the table than the other players. I can guide things, right? The ship of the game is going in a certain direction, yes, and it has inertia, but as the dungeon master, it's my job to blow on the sails, to steer it into the port that I think it belongs in. I don't just want to pick the ship up and drop it where I think it needs to go. I want it to get there on its own. So I just want to blow on the sails a little bit. And this was one of the opportunities to do that. And I didn't do it. And part of me also was wanting the same thing the other players wanted, which was to get to the action. Enough of the blah, blah. I want to kill stuff. But actually, I like the blah, blah too. And so as the dungeon master, it's my opportunity to encourage that. I should have done it. I didn't. So lesson learned, when one of the players has a cool moment that you believe in, encourage the other players to play along. Literally use that language. Say, come on, guys, let's play along. So that's the lesson from this video, character introductions. If you want to tune out now, that's fine. But for those of you who've been following the campaign and want to know what happens next, there was a patrol, an orc and a hellhound, and the patrol found these guys and they weren't surprised and the patrol wasn't surprised, so a battle broke out. I used the chart on the DM screen to determine the starting distance of the encounter. And one of the first things that happened was the hellhound called out to alert the keep that there are intruders at the gates.
Intruder at the front gate.
Basically that, but with hellhounds. And I made a point to say that the hellhounds, that the sound it made was not a normal organic sound. I wanted it to sound almost like a special effect from a movie. Like, yeah, like that. So the players know the keep is alerted, and as a result, the patrol has already succeeded, even though combat hasn't started. They dispatch the patrol easily, but the hellhound does breathe fire. So the players are like, wow, hellhounds, bad news. They retreat, they rest, they come back. Now there are 2 patrols. And Phil came up with a really cool idea. He had his owl Mojo fly around the keep, and anytime he found a patrol, he would stop and circle around it and then move on to the next one. So the players knew in advance there were 2 patrols. That became super useful to them. The hellhounds get their call off, which means the keep is alerted again, but now they've dispatched 3 or 4 orcs and 3 or 4 hellhounds. And I'm keeping track of how many orcs and how many hellhounds are in the keep. which they know. So they know they've depleted the orcs' resources a little bit. But that's the end of that. The orcs are now like, we are under siege, no more patrols, everybody on high alert. And the players know that the orcs are on high alert, so they start wondering, okay, what are we going to do? We need to get in there. They decamp once again, they rest up, they come back, they know the orcs are waiting for them. And they come up with a plan. Zach, playing Iagushka the druid, can turn into a tiny insect, like a spider. He's done that before, he can do it twice per day, it lasts an hour each time. Meanwhile, Mojo the owl can drop him off anywhere in the keep he wants. So he pitches this idea, let me go in there and scout the keep. I can move undetected, they won't suspect a spider, I can go into every room and tell you where all the bad guys are, if they have captives, where the captives are. I think this is a great idea, and I tell them that. These are new players, so I want to make sure they understand what I think about their plans. So this was super cool. I enjoyed doing this quite a lot. I've done stuff like this before, and it's always fun. Zach and I got together at lunch. We worked together, it makes it easy. And we got together in the conference room and I put up the DM screen. It was just him and me, and he had a piece of graph paper and I started describing the keep. Now, normally what I do, because it's all the players at the table, is I take a piece of graph paper and I draw the entrance of the dungeon or the keep or the tower or whatever, and I ask them what they're going to do. And as they explore, I fill in their map. And then I hand the map back to them and they look at it and study it and try to figure out what are we going to do. That's a technique I developed over the last 30 years that just makes everything go in an incredibly straightforward manner. Because when all the players are involved, I don't really think there's any advantage in worrying about like getting lost or anything like that. But this was a special situation where it was just one player on his own and he was in spider form. He wasn't able to take notes or anything like that. So I described everything just using natural language, and it was up to Zach to draw his own map. And I explained that to him. I explained this is a cool opportunity for us to role play the act of you exploring this keep, and you're going to have to take your own notes based purely on my description. And I told him your notes may end up being inaccurate, but that represents the difference between what you remember as a spider and the reality. So I front-loaded the idea that there could be discrepancies between his map and the real map, and that was kind of neat because it represented his faulty memory and perception. And he liked that. He thought that was dramatic and cool, so we went for it. So he spent, we did it all through lunch, and then we did it before the session the next week. So it was probably about an hour and a half of him exploring both levels of the keep. On the top level, he found a bunch of orcs. He also found a big feasting hall. He found the kennels they keep the hellhounds in. And the first room he entered, he found, it was a large room, and in that room was a makeshift cage. Basically like a kennel, but for humans. And in that cage was a young boy. That was the only description I gave him, and he didn't inquire any further. This is an important point, stay tuned. Although we may not get to why that's an important point until the next time we play. So he found one room on the top level that has one prisoner in it. He found a bunch of orcs. He found the hellhounds. He found an ogre, and that's important. The players had seen the ogre in the courtyard of the keep through the owl's eyes. Graves can see through his familiar's eyes, which is super cool. So they knew there was an ogre in the courtyard. I described him as being smaller than a hill giant, but bigger than an orc. And they're like, what is that? They literally had not thought of an ogre. And now Zach has found the ogre, and he's like, oh, this is that thing. He's like, yeah, smaller than a hill giant, bigger than an orc. I get it. So he's taking all these notes and he finds these stairs down. He maps out the lower level to the best of his ability. And at this point, it starts to get a little bit abstract just because he is running out of graph paper. So he starts to mark things as there's a bunch of rooms here. They're all alike. There are a couple of doors. It looks like it's just a wizard's study. And he finds the other prisoners that are down here. He finds 2 dwarves and a dragonborn. And he finds an orc guard and a hellhound down here. But he doesn't find some of the stuff he's looking for. Like he knows that there's a passage from here down into the Underdark. He knows that there's an orc leader here named Bonebreaker Dorakor. I think of Bonebreaker as being like chieftain. It's a title. I wanted to convey to Zach, the player, that there were secret doors that he was missing. And so right as he's kind of reaching the end of the dungeon and there's no more place to explore, and he's starting to wonder, where are the other things that I was looking for? I describe how he retraces his steps and turns a corner he had already explored, and he sees a halfling thief moving from one room to the stairs up. And I said, that thief was not in that room when you walked past it the first time. So the idea is there's a secret door around here somewhere. The halfling thief, along with one of the dwarves he found prisoner, are members of Graves' early party. Although there's something interesting about that halfling thief that I'm not going to tell you, and I haven't told Zach, and the players aren't going to find out until the next video like this. So Zach returns to the players and he shows them his map, which I'm going to show you right now. So here on the right is the actual map of Broken Spire Keep. And here on the left is Zach's map, which he made purely by following my instructions. My descriptions were purely in terms of the dimensions of the room. It's 30 feet north-south. It's 40 feet east-west. There's a door in the northeast corner. Right? He did a pretty good job. It was actually really cool. It was impressive. And I don't think, apart from not finding secret doors, I don't think he screwed anything up. So he returns to the players and they start concocting a plan of how to get in. There is a spire. It is broken. And the orcs are using it as a watchtower. There was always an orc up there. And there's a bell up there, and the orc rings the bell if he sees anything interesting. And unlike a normal spire that has a roof on it, this is a broken spire. And as a result, the orc can kind of just look around. He's standing on a platform, basically a raised platform. It's got a broken wall that provides some cover, but there's a big open part, and he can walk around the entire thing. And using the arrow slits that are up there and the missing wall, he has a 360-degree view of the area that makes it very difficult for anyone to cross the 100 feet of clearing that are all around the keep without him noticing. So this becomes their point of entry. There's a trapdoor that leads to the stairs down. Those stairs down go all the way from the top level down to the middle level, down to the bottom level. Here's a diagram they made. This is Zach's diagram of the three-dimensional view of the tower. There's an orc up there, and they have an idea. Graves has a wand of binding. If he zaps the orc with it, the orc will be frozen in place, and they can take him out. They can scale the tower, and there's nothing the orc can do about it. This prompts a question, and one I don't know the answer to at first, which is, if you cast a spell at somebody, do they know? And I'm like, you know what? I don't know. Let's look it up. We were able to find the answer, and the answer was, unless there's an obvious visual component to the spell, often, no, you don't know. So I ruled, I thought reasonably, that the orc won't know if he fails his save against the Wand of Binding. So their plan was, Graves is going to cast invisibility on himself. He's going to take the Wand of Binding. He's going to go out into the clearing. He's going to wait for the orc to come to the edge of the platform. He's going to zap the orc with the Wand of Binding. He's going to hope the orc fails his save, and then he's going to signal to the party they're all going to climb up the tower. They're going to take out the incapacitated orc and go down. Great plan. Would totally have worked if not every single roll went against the players. Well, not every single roll. Like, the first thing that happened was he crossed the clearing again, and I had to remind him. I even asked him, how are you crossing the clearing? He's like, well, I'm invisible. I just walk out there. The reason I asked that was because I wanted to give him the opportunity to remember the pit traps without telling him about the pit traps. But it had been a week since that introduction and fighting with all the orc patrols, so naturally Phil had forgotten about it. I tried to remind him, but the reminder didn't work. So I told him to roll, and he happened to roll well, so he didn't fall into another pit trap. That was the one roll that went in their favor. Phil was very careful. He said, I want to make sure I have line of sight on the orc, but then I want to wait for the orc to turn around to continue his patrol before I zap him with the wand. Why? Because zapping him with the wand will make Graves visible, and he doesn't want the orc to be looking at him when that happens. So I describe, yeah, of course the orc is on patrol. He looks this way, he looks around, he stops, he thinks, he turns his back to you, and Phil says, I zap him. And of course the orc makes his saving throw, and now Phil is visible and thinks, poop. So he immediately casts invisibility again. That's bad news because Phil only has 2 second-level spells, and he just burned the second one. Which means everything that happens from this point forward happens without the party having their warlock's second-level spells. But that's okay, Phil's at least invisible again. He waits for the orc to come back out, turn his back to him, and he uses the Wand of Binding to cast Hold Person again. And of course, the orc makes his saving throw again. And now Phil is visible and cannot cast invisibility again. So he goes, ah, and runs up to the wall of the keep and presses himself up against it because he doesn't want the orc above him to see him. And of course, the other players are all in the forest watching this, and they see him and they're like, oh my God, what's he doing? Right, they can't make any noise. The orc is still on patrol. His telepathy only goes 60 feet, so he can't communicate with them. Phil has to solve this problem on his own, which he did. He used his telepathy and waited until he could see the orc come over to make his survey of the area. And now he sees the orc and the orc doesn't see him. I had Phil make a stealth roll. I had the orc make a perception check. Orcs are not great at perception. I rolled all these rolls in front of the players, by the way, so there's verisimilitude to what happens. Graves can see the orc, so Graves uses his telepathy. Graves can also speak orcish. And I said, all right, Phil, what are you going to say to the orc? Now, Phil cannot consult the other players because they're in the forest on the other side of the clearing. His telepathy doesn't reach all the way out there. He has to come up with this on his own. And he says, in my best orcish accent, I'm going to tell the orc that Bonebreaker Doracor requires his presence immediately. I thought that's a pretty good idea. I don't think anything like that should just be automatic. But I thought it was a good idea. I wanted him to succeed. He had telepathy, which was really cool and impressive. And he knew orcish and was doing his best orcish accent. So I said, make a persuasion check with advantage. I think that's a perfect opportunity for advantage. I don't even think he needed advantage, though. His first roll was like an 18, and he's a warlock with high charisma, so I think he beat a 20. So I had a lot of fun role-playing the orc, dropping his axe and saying, Grumsh commands, I must obey. Actually, I had fun doing it right then, too. The orc immediately opens up the trapdoor that leads downstairs, and he runs downstairs, leaving the trapdoor open. Now Graves looks into the forest where he knows his party is, and he goes... And of course, they run across the field, led by the ranger who said, I follow Graves's footsteps so we do not fall into a pit trap. Well done, Matt Alpert. Now all the players have to do is scale the tower. How hard can it be? Well, if they could ever roll higher than a 7, it would be really easy. And there's a bit of a Keystone Cops moment, which when I referenced, none of the players knew what I was talking about. I think Phil did, because he's old like I am. Where the thief tried to scale it, it's a simple athletics check. But again, I don't think our thief, Pendleton, played by Paul, has ever rolled higher than about an 11 in the entire campaign. He has never rolled a 20. And we've been playing every week for 3 or 4 months now. So he tries to scale the tower, falls on his butt, takes a d6 damage, And the orc player says, well, I've got a grappling hook. And everyone's like, you've got a grappling hook? Why didn't you tell us that? And I said, you want to use the grappling hook? And EJ, playing his orc fighter, said, yeah, sure. I said, okay, make a ranged attack roll against an armor class of 10. He still has to be able to get the thing up there. It should be pretty straightforward. It's not hard to hit, as long as you can roll higher than a 7, which EJ did not do. So the grappling hook just like falls on his head. I didn't have it do any damage, but I wanted it to be a comedic moment, right? Like everything has gone wrong. So of course I wanted to make that a little comedic moment. So the ranger says, give me that. So the ranger with a high dexterity manages to throw the grappling hook up there easily, get an anchor point, and the entire party can now climb the rope and get into the tower. So there's 2 floors to this. There's a ground floor and the dungeon below, and the stairs go all the way down to the dungeon. So the players go down there and they effortlessly make their way to the jail cell where the prisoners are held. And at this point, I'm busting out my dungeon tiles. Look, I'll show a picture of them right here. I love these tiles. We'll do a whole other video on getting on the grid and we'll talk about the tiles I use. I have actually lots of different grid-based solutions and I deploy them in different circumstances. Some are expensive, some are cheap. The players get to the jail cell, there's a guard, there's a hellhound, they manage to kill the guard and the hellhound, and they rescue these 3 prisoners. And they spend the next 10 or 20 minutes talking to these prisoners, and some cool stuff happens. Like for instance, one of the players, EJ, I think doesn't have a good hook into the world. He's kind of flying by the seat of his pants. He's basically playing a mercenary. He has recovered and is using the Shield of Andrim. The Shield of Andrim is an interesting artifact. It's a powerful shield, but it's also a symbol of authority. Because it's this ancient famous shield, it kind of lends nobility and legitimacy to whoever holds it. And so the dragonborn paladin that they've rescued sees this party, sort of led by this fighter half-orc, who has this shield. The dragonborn asks him about the shield and confirms, he's like, you risked your life to come here and rescue us. Actually, I role-played it. I like doing my own dragonborn voice. You risked your life to save us. Right, they're these big, like reptilian dragon guys. I imagine them with big crocodile heads. This dragonborn gets down on one knee and says, I pledge myself to your service. If my life or death may aid you, it is yours. Love playing dragonborn. And EJ's like, all right, I got a follower. And he was super excited. And I'm actually really looking forward to role-playing this character with his new, patron. His lord, right? This is a knight, this is a lawful good dragonborn paladin, and he is now in service. And I think that's perfectly cool. The fact that EJ's character, Nicodemus the half-orc, is not a traditionally good character doesn't matter to a knight. A knight doesn't care if his noble lord is good, only that he is noble. And the fact that this character has risked his life to come and save him and bears the Shield of Andrim, from this dragonborn's point of view, that's noble enough. So that's a cool moment. One of the dwarves is a member of Graves' party. So there's this great moment where they're reunited. That was a lot of fun to roleplay. And there's this other dwarf who knows things about the bargain the dwarves have made with the Overlord and how it has been subverted. Right? Politics. So all sorts of cool stuff is happening with these NPCs. And after about 20 minutes or half an hour roleplaying, the ranger played by Matt Alpert says, hey, I'm going to look outside the jail cell that we closed and locked behind us and see if there's anything going on out there. And indeed there is. He smells kerosene. And at this point, I deployed my traditional cinematic moment where I move the camera and show the players something the characters couldn't know, which is Bonebreaker Doracor with the human priest that is kind of the leader of this whole operation, and the halfling thief that was a member of Graves' party and now appears to work for the orcs, and a bunch of other orcs and hellhounds, all coming down the corridor to converge on the jail cell. Bonebreaker Doracor turns to his lieutenant and says, mobilize everyone. I want every orc down here. And the players are like, oh no. Right, they're trapped. There's only one door out. The orcs have used kerosene to kind of smoke them out. They haven't lit it on fire yet. If they try to escape, they're going to be fighting in a fire. And now the players are thinking, how on earth do we get out of here? There is literally no way out except past the orcs, of which there are about another 20 in this place, and they're all converging on this corridor in the dungeon. And there's a priest, and there's a halfling thief who appears to be working for the bad guys. And there's a bunch of hellhounds, and somewhere out there is an ogre, and the party are hoping the ogre can't fit in the dungeon. So good news, the players have recovered 3 of the 4 captives in the keep, and those captives are ready to fight. Bad news is they have no arms or armor for those captives, and they are now surrounded with no way out. Things are looking dire for our heroes, folks. We'll find out what happens next after the next time we play. And when I say we, I mean me too. I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm as excited to find out how they get out of this as you guys are. Of course, the first thing that happened the next day when I came into work was Phil said to me, why did I tell him to go get Bonebreaker Doracor? He's like, I could have told him anything else. I could have told him it's time to feed the hellhounds. And I liked that because it showed that Phil understood the reason Bonebreaker Doracor all of a sudden appeared in the middle of the dungeon is because Graves gave the order to this orc to go get him. So of course, when this orc shows up and starts babbling about Grumsh talking to him, Bonebreaker Doracor, who knows there are guys outside the keep who are trying to get in, is like, what are you talking? Uh-oh, right? The player characters are on their way in. Quick, mobilize everybody. So that was our last session. I'm looking forward to the next one. Hopefully you found something interesting or useful in there. Next episode, we're going to talk about introducing villains, how to make the introduction memorable. Often I think we as DMs have a problem when we have a really cool idea for a bad guy, but we don't know how to put him in front of the players in such a way that the players don't just kill him in the first 30 seconds. So that's sort of what we're going to be talking about. As usual, there are no ads. I do not have a Patreon, but if you want to help support the channel, come by my Amazon page. There's a link in the doobly-doo. I'm sure some of you guys are getting sick of hearing me plugging my book, but it's, I think, better than ads. I am an independent fantasy author. If you like fantasy, if you like Dungeons and Dragons, I think you'd probably like the books. Read the reviews, check out a sample, see what you think. I encourage buying the Kindle version because it's only $4, of which I see $3. You can buy it in print, but the print version is, I think, $15, of which I see $1. If you have Kindle Unlimited, feel free to just read it. I get paid for that, believe it or not. It's kind of crazy. Next week, we introduce memorable villains, and hopefully after that, we'll find out what happened to Graves in the party. I think doing an episode a week about my campaign and how it's going is okay, as long as there are lessons there for a new DM. If I ran a session and it was just interesting storytelling, but no DM lessons in it, then I probably won't talk about it. I also have some really cool ideas for upcoming episodes, so stay tuned. Until next time, peace out.